or weaning the calves themselves. So it's important to ask yourself, what are your goals? Do you, is your goal to sell a weaned calf and the last you see of them is getting on this truck right here? Or are you going to own them until they look like this heifer here in the feed yard and sell them as a finished animal? You want to start off, obviously you want to begin with the end in mind. Know where you're going to be going with them. So there's a lot of options. I'm sure there's well more options than what I have listed here, but we can sell the calves at weaning. We can sell them as a preconditioned animal, meaning that they have been weaned off the cow and say for 30 or 45 days, been vaccinated, ready to go. You can background the cattle and then sell them, meaning that they will you're going to keep them and grow them out for 60, 90, 120 days, or whatever it might be. You can retain them till they're finished and look like this girl over here. And then there's lots of different programs you can sell under. There's non-hormone, or known as NHTC, or non-hormone treated cattle. You can sell cattle as non-antibiotic cattle, or all naturals, or all the above, whatever it might be. But knowing what, and I'm not going to get too deep into this. This really isn't about marketing today, but you need to know what you're shooting for when you start off on this venture, especially when you get to the point of, okay, I'm going to wean my calves. What's the end game? What am I going to do with them? And then it's important, lastly, to get paid for what you're doing. And if you are going to precondition those calves, you want to make sure that you've got those cattle sold as preconditioned animals, that you are getting paid for the work you're going to, because the cattle, they're going to require feed, and during that first 30 or 45 days, they may not gain a lot of weight, and so you're also going to vaccinate them or whatever the buyer wants you to do. So make sure you're getting paid. Also, if you're not going to implant your calves, if you're not going to use antibiotics, make sure that those cattle are going into market where they get a premium, because you are giving up some performance by giving up the technology. So again, begin with the end in mind. Know what direction you're going with the cattle when you make these decisions through the production process. Okay, so a little bit about pre-weaning nutrition. Generally, I found that when you take care of the cow, she's going to take care of the calf. And there may be situations when this is not the case. We can address that a little bit. But generally speaking, you want to make sure that cow is well taken care of. Calves are going to consume mineral. They're going to consume any supplemental feed you feed to that cow. And so having the calf's particularly mineral status in place is really critical. So you're going to need to make sure that the cow has adequate mineral to make sure that calf does as well. And I can tell you that vitamin and mineral nutrition is really critical for optimal health and growth of your calves. And I have seen many times when weaning calves and in the feed yard, when cattle have fantastic health at the ranch, and as soon as you take them off that cow, they completely fall apart. And so and oftentimes that's really a case of the vitamin and mineral nutrition maybe being adequate for the animal when they're not under a high stress situation, but as soon as they are weaned off the cow, maybe put on a truck and hauled someplace else, or put in a pen and fed feed they're not familiar with, you're adding some stress to that animal's life, and can really cause some problems if their vitamin and mineral nutrition is not adequate. So once again, you'll hear many times from cow-calf producers, well, the cattle never got sick at the ranch. That's oftentimes true, but when they hit a more stressful part of their life, that's when the fruits of good nutrition or lack of nutrition at the ranch level can come to fruition, and we can oftentimes see some problems. And then, I would say if you're in a situation where your calves are really energy and protein deficient, you've really got a couple of options, but it may be more efficient to feed the calf directly rather than trying to feed that through the cow. That may be in terms of creep feeders, if you've got that option, if you're set up. That's pretty difficult in a range situation. Or if you are running out on range and it's really dry and the calves really aren't growing and doing much, the best thing may be to early wean the calves. And I've seen calves wean quite early and get along okay, but it does take a lot of special special nutritional program, especially if they're really young, say in the 120 day age range. But as they get a little bit older, they can usually handle weaning fairly well, and it may be the best thing to do at times to get that calf off the cow, let the cow put some weight on, and feed the calf directly. Just really depends on your pasture or range situation. Okay, so a little bit about weaning itself and weaning management. It's a good idea if you can, and oftentimes, maybe in a range situation, this is difficult to do, but I've seen it be very helpful if you can feed, if you got the calf still on the cow, if you can feed those cows a little something and let the calf recognize whatever you're feeding as feed. That calf will learn from the cow. And whether it's hay, in some cases a calf may have never seen hay, or any other kind of processed feed, if you can, this is a good idea to do. Let them figure out what feed is a week or two before you actually wean them. So there's lots of different weaning methods, and I've seen them. These all work and can work fine. What's probably most common is just a breath removal. We're taking the calf right off the cow, and it's better to leave the calves where you wean them, especially if you've allowed them to settle and to be with their mama and to suck the cow in that place, and then pull the cows off and take them out of sight and out of earshot if you can. And generally speaking, when you're going to do a breath removal, I either like to ship those calves immediately or to hold them for 45 days. Doing anything in between that can actually be problematic in terms of oftentimes you have a disease process that takes, once they've been stressed and exposed to different diseases, it takes about 21 days or so to incubate that. So if you pull those calves off, ship them in 2 weeks, you might start to see a lot of problems develop and really hit those cattle with another stress right in the middle of the time that they were going to break anyway. And so a breath removal is fine, it can work, but either chip them immediately or hold them for 45 days and get them fully through the weaning process. Another thing I've seen work that some folks like to do is use these nose flaps. And this is an example of this calf here, where it prevents the calf from sucking. That allows that calf to stay with the cow, so you don't have the stress of actual removal, but she's no longer sucking the cow or getting any nutrition from that cow. That helps the cow get to where she gets over the process of letting her mammary gland fill up. She works through that, and so she's no longer feeling the pain of not having a calf there, in roughly a week's time, and the calf gets used to not having that contact with the dam in terms from the suckling behavior, and that can kind of ease the stress of weaning. You can pull the calves off, roughly a week later, take the nose flaps on and move on. If that works into your logistics, it can be a good way to do it. Another good way that I think a lot of people have tried, but I've seen work fairly successfully this last little while, and that's fence line weaning. And there's a good example of cows in a fence line weaning situation. You've got the cows on, you split the calves one day off, cows on one side of the fence, calves on the other. In this case, you got a hot wire. You can see it right here to kind of reinforce that fence a little bit. They can see each other. They can stand by each other, but there's no contact. There'll be some balling back and forth across the fence, but it really reduces the stress of weaning, and I've seen it work really, really, really well. Having talked to a lot of guys that have done it, one thing that they will tell you that I found an interesting comment was, sooner or later you're going to have a calf on the wrong side or a cow on the wrong side of the fence. They all have felt that if it's only just one or two or whatever it might be, a real small percentage of the animals you're dealing with, don't stress on cutting them all out. It's more stressful to go in and try to pull them out than just leave that one or two cows on either side, or cows or calves, and then when it's time to pull them apart, you just go ride them out at that time. That having one or two of them on the wrong side of the fence is not the end of the world. But anyway, I've seen this work real good. So there's just a few options there. But one thing I think is really important in the weaning process is avoid dust. If you're going to keep cattle in a pen, you can wet them down prior to weaning, and that doesn't mean make a mud hole out of your pen, but it just wet them down to calm the dust, because as you all know, those calves will walk and walk and walk and create a lot of dust. And the other thing I really like, this is a picture of it here, is to put some bedding in the pen. Oftentimes we only think of bedding when we're dealing with wet weather, but cattle prefer to lay down on forage. They're more comfortable with it. It's a place for them to gather and to lay down, and it definitely reduces the walking and bawling you see when calves are being weaned, and gives them a comfortable place to lay down. When it's real hot, the floor of your pen, if it's dark in color, can be really make it even hotter and more comfortable or more uncomfortable to lay down. So the bedding really adds in that sense as well. And then weather. If you have the ability to work around big weather changes that you see coming down the line, that is also helpful. Not always possible. You might have trucks lined up. You might have everything lined up when you need to go. But if you know there's going to be a big weather front come in, if you can avoid that, let it pass and let the cattle get through that, it can help and reduce your amount of sickness that you might see as well. Okay, a little bit about weaning, and we're talking about a vaccination program. And the thing that I want to make really a stress to all of y'all today or tonight is you want to talk to your veterinarian. I'm going to give you some recommendations and some things that I've seen work, but this discussion does not take the place of consulting with your local vet. They definitely have the expertise, not only educationally, but also in terms of your local area, that I would bring them in the loop. But with that said, just a few thoughts on an overall vaccination program. If with your own calves, if you've got them on the ranch, at branding, I keep it fairly simple, but I like to use a 5-way modified live vaccine that's going to include IVR, BVD, that's type 1 and 2, PI3, and RSV. There's lots of different brand names you can use here, and I won't try to promote any brands, but there's a lot of good ones out there that you can use. But I like to use the modified live as opposed to the killed. I think you get a better response there. Another one I would vaccinate for is a Pastorella or Mannheimia hemolytica. There are several brands that you can do that are kind of one-shot kind of programs. These are some brand names that are out there. There's probably others. We've got Pre-Spons, Nuplura, or One Shot. You can also get some of these in combination with a 5-way modified live vaccine. In that sense, you only have to give one vaccine. So that's really critical. If you want to give one, it makes it simpler. And then some sort of a clostridial vaccine. I have 8-way here. You can probably do 7-way as well. But also dehorn and castrate as well at this time. Don't wait until later. It's way easier on the animal to do it at branding and let the cow take care of that calf after they undergo this process. I don't talk really in this talk about vaccine handling, but I will say as you talk to your vet, that is a super critical point, that vaccines need to be handled properly. They need to be kept cool. You don't want to mix them too far ahead of when you're going to be using them. You don't want to hold mixed vaccine overnight and use it the next day. It's got to be handled properly. The instructions are usually going to be with the product that you buy, but also talk to your vet. But being clean and handling vaccines properly is important. Okay, when it comes to pre-weaning, in an ideal world, which many of you may not deal in, but if you do have the option to vaccinate those calves again right before weaning, that's optimal. 2 to 3 weeks before weaning, and I would just repeat this same regimen that we used at branding. Some folks might like to use a different brand of vaccine than you use this time around to give you maybe slightly different coverage. Again, your veterinarian may have some advice along those lines. But again, a lot of folks, this is tough for a lot of people to do, because oftentimes you bring your cattle in off the range, you're going to brand it, you're going to weed them, and go from there. And so this isn't obviously a requirement, but if you can do it, that's great. If not, then when you bring them in at weaning, we're going to repeat this branding regimen if we don't have the option to pre-wean. The thing I would add to that is deworming. Now, a lot of you folks may feel like you don't have a worm issue in some of these drier climates, and certainly some areas are worse than others, no doubt about it. But when we're looking at the value of cattle today, any depression in performance due to a worm issue is really you're really giving up quite a bit. So I would use two different types of wormers. You can use a pour-on and injectable. There's multiple brands in this category. They'll hit both internal and external parasites, and also use some sort of a white wormer. It's all specific it's a drench, all specific for internal parasites, and it will cover some internal parasites that are not covered by your pour-on and injectable. Again, when we're looking at the value of cattle today, and I'm going to probably say that more than once, you really want to look hard at that. And then lastly is some sort of a mass treatment with antibiotics. Again, you're going to need to talk to your veterinarian. You're likely going to need a prescription for the antibiotics, and talk about your risk factors. I've seen it work really well to just go ahead and treat all the animals with antibiotics. Obviously, if they are going into some sort of a non-antibiotic program or whatever it might be, that's not an option. But I do think this should be a consideration. I'm not saying that you have to do it, or you should or not, but make sure you think about it, your specific situation, talk to your vet, and see what you think might be best. Okay, we're going to talk about water again real quick. Can't overdo this one. We talked about keeping it clean. Water tanks need to be cleaned. Cattle dribble all kinds of feed and all kinds of stuff in their water tank, and if you've got small waterers, they really, especially during the weaning time, during that, say, 3 weeks or so, really highly stressful time, I'd be cleaning those waters every day. It's not hard to do. If you're in the cattle, you're checking them, you can pull the plug out of that tank, scrub it out real quick, fill it back up. They've always got clean water. That may not be possible depending on your water tank situation, but ideally that's would be good to do. The other thing is to try to set up to prevent cattle from standing in the water. You can see these big Holstein steers in here, and Holsteins are worse than any others about like getting into mischief and causing problems, but a lot of times your cattle will like to stand in the water, and it's just like this tub here, cattle could easily stand in it. So you want to try to set things up so it's more difficult for them to stand in the water. The other one is easy access. You don't want a mud hole around your water tank. You don't want it too tall. And when you look at the reason that this tub is in this pen, is we wanted to be sure that these cattle found the water tank. And the water tank is here in the fence line. Sometimes they may have difficulty finding it, whatever it might be. Do not want to let water intake be a problem. And so you can even go to this point of having a temporary tank that you might fill in some other manner to make sure these cattle are finding the water. And again, I hit this last point, is can they find the water? It's interesting, and I've seen over the years some sets of cattle have trouble finding water for whatever reason. You can do a lot of different things. These cattle may have never had a drink out of a water tank. They may never even had a drink out of a pond. It may all be live water, depending on your range situation or where you bought the cattle from. They may have difficulties understanding where water is. I've seen guys let water tanks overflow just for, say, a day or a short period of time, just to let cattle know where it's at. Maybe when they first come into a pen, they can see and hear that water running. I'm also seeing extending a garden hose, a short length of garden hose to the end of the faucet in the outtake in the water tank, loop it up over the fence and let it drip into or run into the water tank that way as well. Anything to let them know where the water's at can be helpful. Just a quick story. Several years ago, saw a group of cattle that all came from the same ranch into a grow yard facility, shipped into their ranch over several days. But there was one pen of cattle that came in, and after several days, started not to look good. They weren't eating any feed. It was hot. All the other cattle were fine. Same pen, or the pens right next to each other, but one set just looked really bad. And so the folks that were taking care of them came over and asked me to take a look at them. I went out and looked at them, and boy, they looked rough. And so I suggested that he pull the plug out of the water tank. And so we went over and did that, and those cattle immediately ran to that water tank. And the reality of it is that they were standing in a pen with a water tank. All the cattle around them had no problems with the water tank. They did not find the water. That's rare, but it does happen. So always be aware that if cattle are not eating, the first thing you want to look at is water, and make sure they know where the water's at.